Nicole West, Roger's new wife, plotted to take away all the assets my father left me. But she didn't expect that everything was according to my father's plan. My name is Pamela Harris, 31 years old, and I am the legal heir to my father Harold Harris estate. The morning air still carried the scent of last night's rain as I knelt in my father's garden, fingers brushing against the velvety petals of the white roses he planted decades ago. This garden had always been his sanctuary, his way of controlling the chaos of the world. Even in death, Harold Harris's presence lingered in every carefully pruned bush and every stone-lined path. I was clipping away a withered leaf when I heard it, the sharp, calculated click of expensive heels on gravel. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Nicole West. The name alone was enough to make my grip on the garden shears tighten. She stopped just behind me, close enough for her perfume, a synthetic blend of vanilla and desperation to pollute the crisp morning air. "Still playing in the dirt, Pamela?" Her voice dripped with the kind of artificial sweetness that could rot teeth. I exhaled slowly through my nose, willing myself to stay composed. "Still stomping where you don't belong, Nicole?" I finally stood, brushing the soil off my hands onto my jeans, deliberately taking my time. When I faced her, she was exactly as I expected, dressed to kill in a form-fitting designer dress, her platinum hair sleek and perfect, her manicured fingers wrapped around a leather-bound portfolio like it held the secret to world domination. She smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "You know why I'm here." I didn't bother answering. "The reading of the will is tomorrow," she continued, tilting her head like she was speaking to a particularly slow child, "and Roger and I think it's best if we discuss things beforehand, civilly." I let out a humorless laugh. "Civilly?" I repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's rich, coming from the woman who slept with my husband while I was still married to him." Nicole's smile never wavered, but her eyes darkened. "That's ancient history, Pamela. Try to move on, would you? We're here to talk about your father's estate." My father's estate. The words settled in my chest like a stone. She took a step closer, her red lips curling into a smirk. "And since Harold considered Roger like a son for 15 years, we believe we're entitled to our fair share." My fingers twitched, itching to reach for the pruning shears still clutched in my hand, but I forced my voice to stay level. "You actually think my father would leave anything to the man who cheated on me?" "Harold forgave him," Nicole said smoothly, flipping open her portfolio as if it contained some legally binding evidence of her delusion. "They still played golf together every Sunday until, well, you know." The mention of my father's death was a deliberate jab. 2 weeks. He had been gone just 2 weeks, and here she was, circling like a vulture, picking at the bones of his legacy before the grave had even settled. "My father wasn't stupid," I said flatly. Nicole arched a perfectly sculpted brow. "We'll see about that," she purred. Then, as if twisting the knife just for sport, she added, "Your brother seems to think differently." That stopped me cold. "Sean." A chill ran through me despite the morning sun warming my back. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. While I grieved, he had spent more time with Roger than with his own family, laughing over drinks at the country club like nothing had changed. I narrowed my eyes. "You've been talking to Sean?" Nicole smiled as if we were sharing some private joke. "More than talking. He's been very helpful." I gritted my teeth, willing my voice to stay even. "Get off my property, Nicole." She didn't move, just stood there, watching me like a cat watching a wounded bird. "You should start packing," she mused. "Roger and I will need at least a month to renovate once the estate is officially ours." That was the last straw. I stepped forward, invading her space, just enough to make her take half a step back. "Let me make something very clear to you, Nicole," I said, my voice as steady as the ground beneath me. "This house, this garden, everything my father built, it's not some prize for you to sink your claws into." She blinked, taken aback for the first time. I didn't stop. "You and Roger can plot and scheme all you want, but tomorrow, when that will is read, you're going to learn something about my father that you never understood." "And what's that?" she challenged, her smug expression returning. I smiled. He always planned 2 steps ahead. Nicole's lips parted like she wanted to respond, but something in my eyes must have warned her off. Instead, she let out a light laugh, flicked her hair over her shoulder, and turned toward the path. "I guess we'll see, won't we?" she called over her shoulder as she walked away. I watched her leave, her heels clicking against the stone path, the sound grating against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. Only when the engine of her expensive car faded into the distance did I exhale, my whole body trembling with barely contained rage. Then something caught my eye, a glint of white, barely visible beneath the lowest branches of the rose bush. I frowned, stepping closer, reaching down. It was an envelope, damp at the edges from the morning dew, its yellowed paper softened with time. But the handwriting on the front made my breath hitch. My father's. My hands shook as I picked it up, carefully turning it over. Tucked inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. I swallowed, my pulse pounding in my ears as I unfolded the letter. My dearest Pamela, if you're reading this, then someone has already come sniffing around the estate. And if I had to guess, I'd say her name starts with an N. I let out a shaky laugh, my eyes stinging. There's something you need to know. Something I didn't have time to tell you. The key enclosed opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. Remember what I taught you about chess? Sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Trust yourself. Love, Dad. I stared at the letter, my heart hammering against my ribs. My father knew. He had seen this coming. A slow, steely determination settled over me as I clenched the letter in my fist. Whatever game Nicole thought she was playing, whatever trick she and Roger had up their sleeves, they were about to learn the hard way. Harold Harris had taught me how to fight, and this was a battle I intended to win. I stood frozen in the garden, the letter trembling in my hands, my father's words ringing in my head like a long-forgotten warning. He knew. My father had seen this coming. The revelation sent a shockwave through me, a mixture of grief and fury twisting together like a vice around my chest. I should have known. My father had always been 2 steps ahead, always planning, always anticipating, and now, even from beyond the grave, he was guiding me. I turned the small brass key over in my palm, the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. My pulse pounded in my ears as I headed inside, my fingers already dialing the only person who would understand the weight of this moment. Betty picked up on the second ring. Pamela, what's wrong? Her voice was sharp, professional, but underneath I could hear the concern of a friend who had been through hell with me before. I need you to come over, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Now. There was a pause. Then, without hesitation, she said, I'm on my way. I ended the call and marched toward my father's study, the familiar scent of old books and pipe tobacco still lingering in the air, wrapping around me like a ghost of the past. The leather chair behind the massive oak desk was exactly as he had left it, the stack of papers neatly arranged, the brass lamp casting a warm glow. I moved toward the desk, hesitating only for a second before I slid the key into the lock of the bottom drawer. Click. The lock released, the sound eerily loud in the silence. I pulled it open. Inside, a thick manila envelope sat atop a small, unmarked USB drive. My breath caught. I reached for the envelope first, my fingers clenching around the edges as I lifted it from the drawer and flipped it open. And then everything fell into place. Photos, stacks of them printed in glossy detail. Nicole sitting across from a man in a dimly lit restaurant, her expression calculated, her lips forming words that even in silence looked like manipulation. Roger, shaking hands with someone in a tailored suit outside an unfamiliar office. Documents, printed emails, bank statements. A timeline carefully put together, each piece adding to the puzzle of betrayal. My father hadn't just suspected them, he had them investigated. A cold realization settled over me. Harold Harris had known exactly who Nicole West was, and he had prepared for war. I was still staring at the photos when Betty arrived. She swept into the room in a crisp navy suit, her briefcase in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other. I figured we might need this, she said, lifting the bottle before setting it on the desk. Now tell me everything. I barely managed to choke out the words. He knew, Betty. My father knew all along. I shoved the envelope toward her, my hands shaking as I reached for the USB drive. She flipped through the photos, her sharp eyes scanning the evidence with the precision of a woman who lived and breathed the law. This is damning, she murmured. He built an airtight case. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. And the reading is tomorrow. Betty looked up, understanding flashing in her eyes. Which means this isn't over yet. I inserted the USB into my father's computer, my heart pounding as I clicked open the file. A list of video recordings appeared. Betty leaned in. Play the first one. I clicked. The screen flickered, then came to life with the grainy footage of a parking lot at night. A figure stepped into view, Nicole. She was speaking to a man I didn't recognize, but her voice was clear, clipped with impatience. "I don't care what it takes," she snapped. "If Harold changes that will, I want to know immediately." The man nodded, and if he doesn't? Nicole's lips curled into a smirk. Then we wait. The old man won't last forever. My stomach twisted. Betty exhaled sharply. She was waiting for him to die, my hands clenched into fists. She knew. She was playing the long game. I clicked on the next video. This one showed Roger, sitting in an office, his voice hushed as he leaned across a desk. "She won't fight it," he was saying. "Pamela's soft. She doesn't have the stomach for this kind of battle." My blood turned to ice. Betty let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, if only he knew." I clicked on another. And that's when I saw him, Sean. My breath caught as my brother appeared on the screen, sitting across from Nicole in what looked like a hotel lobby. Nicole slid a check across the table. "For your cooperation," she said smoothly. Sean didn't take it. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "This is a dangerous game, Nicole," Nicole smirked. "Only if you play it wrong." The video ended. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Betty shifted beside me. "You need to talk to him." I didn't want to. I didn't want to know how deep he was in, but I had no choice. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sean's number. He answered on the first ring. "Pamela," he said, his voice careful. "I was going to call you." I swallowed hard. "I think we need to talk. In person." A pause. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." I hung up, my hands gripping the edge of the desk as I tried to steady myself. Betty placed a hand on my shoulder. "No matter what he says, remember this. Your father trusted you to handle this. You're not alone." I nodded, exhaling shakily. An hour later, when Sean walked into my father's study, I could already see it in his eyes. Guilt. He glanced at the files spread across the desk, the paused video on the computer screen. Then he looked at me. "You saw everything." It wasn't a question. I folded my arms. "You tell me, Sean. Exactly how deep are you in this?" He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Not in the way you think." "Then explain." Sean walked to the window, staring out at our father's garden. "Dad knew what they were up to," he said quietly. "He knew Nicole was dangerous. That's why he asked me to play along." I froze. "What?" "He needed someone on the inside," Sean continued, turning to face me. "Someone to feed them just enough information to keep them confident, to let them think they were winning." My mind reeled. I had spent weeks thinking my brother had betrayed me, and all this time he had been playing the long game. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. Sean's eyes softened. "Because you had to believe it was real. If you knew, you wouldn't have been able to hide it, and Nicole would have seen right through you." I clenched my jaw. "So what now?" Sean's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "Now we let them walk right into the trap Dad set for them." I stared at him, realization settling over me. Tomorrow, at the will reading, Nicole and Roger thought they were going to win, but they had no idea what was coming, and for the first time since my father's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt ready. I stood in the grand foyer of my father's estate, listening to the steady hum of voices from the other room. The air was thick with tension, laced with the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. A storm was coming. I could feel it in the charged silence between each tick of the grandfather clock. Sean leaned in beside me. "You ready for this?" I exhaled slowly, my hands curling into fists at my sides, more than ready. Through the open doors of the study, I saw them, Nicole and Roger, seated on one side of the massive mahogany conference table, their postures radiating smug anticipation. Nicole, as always, looked flawless, her platinum hair cascading over the shoulder of her pristine white suit. Beside her, Roger sat stiffly, his fingers tapping against his thigh. But it was the camera crew hovering in the background that really set my teeth on edge. She brought cameras. Of course she did. This wasn't just a will reading to her. This was a performance. A carefully curated, self-indulgent documentary of her triumph. In her mind, this was her coronation, and she had every intention of capturing the moment for posterity. I tightened my jaw and walked into the room. Pamela, Nicole greeted smoothly, her tone saccharine. So glad you could make it. I ignored her, taking my seat across from her. Betty, ever the professional, was already arranging documents in front of her. She met my gaze briefly, giving me the slightest nod, a signal that everything was in place. The moment had arrived. Let's begin, Betty announced, flipping open a leather-bound folder. As Harold Harris Legal Counsel, I will now read his last will and testament. The room stilled. I held my breath as Betty's steady voice filled the space, reciting the formalities before finally arriving at the part we were all waiting for. As per Harold Harris' wishes, his estate will be divided as follows. 60% will be left to his daughter, Pamela Harris. I could feel Nicole's body tensing beside me. And 40% will be granted to Roger West. The second the words left Betty's lips, Nicole let out a triumphant laugh, not a soft chuckle, but a full-blown victorious cackle. I knew it, she breathed, gripping Roger's hand. I told you Harold wouldn't leave us out. She turned to the cameras, flashing her perfect TV-ready smile. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced grandly, justice prevails. I felt my stomach twist. This was all so predictable. Her arrogance, her entitlement, the way she genuinely believed she had won. I watched as she reached for the document, running her manicured fingers over the page as if she were physically claiming her prize. We'll have to start renovations immediately, she mused aloud. This house is long overdue for a proper makeover. I felt my nails dig into my palm. Nicole smirked at me, tilting her head like a cat toying with a wounded bird. Oh, Pamela, you really should start packing, maybe something modest. I hear apartment living has its charms. I said nothing. I didn't have to, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Betty cleared her throat, her expression neutral. Actually, she said, flipping to another document, there is one additional clause we need to discuss. Nicole's smirk faltered. What? Betty lifted the paper, reading aloud with the same measured calm that had carried us through countless legal battles. As per an amendment made 3 days before Harold Harris's passing, any beneficiary of this must undergo a full legal audit and investigation into their financial activities before receiving their inheritance. A single second stretched into an eternity. Then, what? Nicole's voice sharpened, her smile vanishing. Betty continued unfazed. In the event that any evidence of fraud, embezzlement, or financial misconduct is discovered, the involved parties forfeit their claim to the estate. Nicole's spine went rigid. That's ridiculous, Roger paled. This wasn't part of the original will. It was added legally by Harold Harris himself, Betty countered, tapping the official signature, 3 days before he passed. Nicole's mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head, laughing, but there was a new edge to it, panic. This is just a formality, she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. We have nothing to hide. Betty's lips curled. Well, let's find out. She reached into the briefcase beside her and pulled out the evidence, a thick file bursting with papers, a USB drive, photographs, emails. Nicole stilled. This, Betty said, her voice like steel, is what Harold Harris left behind. One by one, she laid out the pieces of my father's trap. Photos of Nicole meeting with an accountant in a dimly lit parking lot, of Roger signing papers in an unfamiliar office, bank statements, money siphoned from my father's company into offshore accounts, email change, Nicole instructing a staff member to find leverage against me in case the will didn't go her way. And then the final nail in the coffin, Betty inserted the USB drive into the laptop. The room filled with the grainy security footage of Nicole sliding an envelope across a desk. If he changes the will, I want to know immediately, her voice crackled through the speakers. A second clip played. Roger, sitting in an office, whispering, "She won't fight it. Pamela's soft. She doesn't have the stomach for this kind of battle." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Then Nicole snapped. She lunged across the table, slamming her hands down, knocking over the neatly stacked documents. "This is a setup," she shrieked. This is illegal." Betty didn't blink. "Actually, it's justice." Nicole's breaths came fast and shallow. "Roger," she hissed, rounding on him. "Say something!" But Roger was silent, because he knew, we all did, they were trapped. And then, the best part. The part I had been waiting for. Nicole turned to Sean, her lips curling in fury. "You," she spat. "You were supposed to be on our side." Sean simply leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Yeah," he said coolly. "About that," Nicole screamed. A raw, guttural sound of rage and realization. "This is a conspiac." "Enough," the voice came from the doorway. We all turned. A police officer stepped inside, followed by 2 more. Nicole's face drained of color. Nicole West, the officer said, pulling out a pair of cuffs. You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted bribery. Nicole shook her head wildly. No, you can't. But the moment she started screaming, the cameras were still rolling. They captured every second of her unraveling, the perfect, polished persona shattered. And as they dragged her out, kicking and wailing, I allowed myself a single, quiet victory. She had thought she won. She had walked into this house expecting to claim everything. Instead, she destroyed herself. And my father, he had won, even from beyond the grave. The moment the cuffs snapped around Nicole's wrists, the room seemed to hold its breath. For a split second, she just stood there, frozen, her mind scrambling for an escape that didn't exist. Then she exploded. "This is insanity!" she shrieked, twisting violently in the officer's grip. "You think you can do this to me?" Her perfectly manicured nails clawed at the air as if she could physically grab hold of her slipping control. The cameras were still rolling. Every angle caught her unraveling in real time. The woman who had walked in so confident, so assured of her victory, was now a caged animal, thrashing against a fate she never saw coming. I folded my arms, watching as she turned her fury on Roger. "You spineless bastard," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Say something." Roger just stared at her. His face, normally so smug, was pale and tense, his jaw twitching. The weight of everything, the evidence, the cameras, the police, was pressing down on him, and I saw the exact moment he realized there was no way out, except one. "I want to make a deal," he blurted out. Nicole snapped toward him like a whip. "What?" Roger turned to the lead officer. "I'll cooperate," he said quickly. "I have more information, emails, records, bank transactions. If I help you, can we discuss my sentencing?" The betrayal hit Nicole like a slap. Her face contorted, disbelief bleeding into sheer, blinding rage. "You coward!" she spat. You spineless, pathetic little—" "Take her," the officer cut in, nodding to his team. They yanked her toward the door, but she fought like hell, heels screeching against the polished floor. "This isn't over," she screamed, thrashing in their grip. Her wild eyes locked onto mine, her lip curled like a feral dog. "Pamela, you bitch, I will ruin you. You think this is a victory? I will bury you." I didn't blink, I didn't flinch, I just tilted my head slightly. "You'll have plenty of time to think about that in prison." Her scream was pure, unfiltered hatred as they dragged her out. The moment the doors slammed shut behind her, the entire room exhaled. Roger slumped into his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. His lawyer was already pulling him aside, whispering about deals and negotiations. Betty leaned in next to me. "Well," she murmured, "that went well." I let out a slow breath. "She never saw it coming," Betty smirked. "Oh, she saw it. She just thought she was untouchable. She wasn't." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal meetings, statements, and media chaos. Nicole's arrest made headlines. News vans parked outside the estate, reporters speculating on the biggest scandal of the decade. Then came the bombshell. The police uncovered something even I hadn't expected. Nicole West wasn't her real name. She was actually Margaret Phillips, a professional con artist with a long history of fraud, identity theft, and financial schemes spanning multiple states. I sat in stunned silence as the detective laid out her past in black and white. "She's been playing this game for over a decade," he explained. Different names, different husbands, always targeting wealthy families with internal conflicts she could exploit. My stomach twisted. "This wasn't just about Dad's estate," I murmured. The detective shook his head. "No, you were just her latest project." I swallowed hard, the weight of it all pressing down on me. For 3 years, I had thought she was just some manipulative gold digger who got lucky. But she was so much worse. She had orchestrated everything, planned it from the moment she stepped into our lives. And now she was finally exposed. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom staring at the back of Nicole's head. She wasn't wearing designer clothes anymore, no tailored blazers or diamond earrings, just an orange prison jumpsuit and the remnants of a woman who had lost everything. The prosecutor presented the case with brutal precision, every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every shady business deal. Then came my turn. The bailiff called my name, and I walked to the witness stand, my heels echoing in the silent courtroom. Nicole turned to face me. The moment our eyes met, her expression hardened, daring me. I took my seat, hands folded neatly in my lap, and then I told the truth. I told them about my father, his kindness, his brilliance, how he had seen through her but didn't have the time to stop her himself. I told them about the will reading, the trap, the evidence, and I told them what she had said to me as they dragged her away. I will ruin you. The prosecutor nodded. And do you believe that, had she succeeded in obtaining the estate, you would be in danger? I didn't hesitate. Yes, Nicole let out a sharp, bitter laugh. The judge lifted an eyebrow. Ms. West, you will remain silent. Nicole, of course, didn't listen. Her laughter grew, shaking her shoulders, spilling into the air like poison. You think I'm dangerous? She sneered, leaning forward. You think I was the problem? Look around, Pamela. You're all vultures. Her voice rose. I should have finished what I started. You should be 6 feet under, you pathetic, spoiled little bang. The judge's gavel slammed down. Enough. Nicole froze. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge stared down at her, face unreadable. Then, in a voice cold as steel, he said, "That just made my decision much easier." Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. Roger, sitting 3 rows back, just closed his eyes, defeated. Nicole West, also known as Margaret Phillips, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. My entire body exhaled. Beside me, Betty squeezed my hand. Nicole sat stunned, her mouth slightly open. Her whole life, her game, was over. Then the judge turned to Roger. Roger West, for your cooperation with authorities, your sentence will be reduced to 10 years in federal prison. Roger nodded stiffly. He didn't fight it, he didn't beg, he just accepted his fate. And then, just like that, it was done. Nicole was led away, her face blank, her eyes staring at nothing. Roger followed soon after. I watched them go, knowing I would never see them again. The storm had passed, and I really felt free. For the first time in months, there were no lawyers, no reporters, no police officers pacing the halls with questions and evidence, no vultures circling, just silence. I stood in my father's study, staring at the now empty chair where he used to sit, the faint scent of pipe tobacco still clinging to the leather. The storm had passed, the war was over, Nicole was gone, locked away for life. Roger had taken his deal and would be sitting in a cell for the next decade. And I had won. But as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of my father's carefully orchestrated battle, something didn't feel settled. There was one last piece of my father's plan I still hadn't uncovered, his final move, and I had a feeling I knew where to find it. The greenhouse was tucked away at the far end of the estate, hidden from view behind towering oak trees. My father had always called it his sanctuary, the place where he could think, plan, and create something that would outlive him. I hadn't stepped inside since he died. But now, as I turned the key in the lock and pushed open the door, the warm, humid air wrapped around me, thick with the scent of soil and blooming jasmine. Everything was exactly as he had left it. His workbench was still covered in gardening tools, a pair of gloves folded neatly beside a half-filled notebook. Orchids, lilies, and ivy thrived in the filtered sunlight, untouched by the chaos that had consumed the estate, and then there it was, a single envelope sitting in the center of the workbench, with my name on it. I swallowed, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. The paper felt heavy, weighted with meaning, with purpose. I took a deep breath and opened it. My dearest Pamela, by now, justice has been served, and the truth has found its way to the light. But justice was never the only thing I wanted for you. I wanted you to be free. Free from doubt, free from fear, free from the past that tried to break you. That's why I bought the land next to your old shop. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. You built something beautiful once, Pamela, and when you lost it, I know you thought it was the end of everything. But flowers don't stop growing just because a storm tries to tear them down. They find new ground. They root deeper, they bloom again. You were never meant to just protect what I left behind, you were meant to build something greater. Harrison Gardens belongs to you now, not just the estate. The future. Some flowers only bloom after the storm. It's time to bloom, my girl. Love, Dad. I stared at the letter, my vision blurring with tears. He had known. He had always known. While I had been fighting to hold on to the past, he had been quietly laying the foundation for my future. He hadn't just left me an inheritance, he had left me a way forward. Sean and Betty were waiting for me in the kitchen when I returned to the house, their voices low, talking over coffee. They both looked up when they saw my face. Sean frowned. What happened? I set the letter on the table, pressing my hands flat against the surface, trying to steady myself. He bought the lot next to my old shop, I said softly. He wanted me to rebuild. Betty was the first to react, a slow smile spreading across her face, that sneaky, brilliant old man. Sean leaned back in his chair, exhaling. Jesus, he really thought of everything. I nodded, running my fingers over the edge of the letter. For so long I had felt like I was stuck, trapped in the wreckage of everything Nicole and Roger had tried to steal from me, but my father had seen what I couldn't. He had seen a way forward. Betty tapped her pen against the table. So, she said, eyes twinkling, do I need to start filing business permits? I let out a shaky laugh. Yes, I said, stronger this time. It's time, Sean grinned. You'll need help with the groundwork. I've been keeping Dad's orchids alive for months. Guess I should put that experience to use, I smirked. You're going to be covered in dirt, Sean shrugged. I deserve worse after the hell I put you through. Betty raised an eyebrow. I could always draft up a binding contract if you want to make it official, Sean groaned. Jesus Christ, Betty, do you ever stop being a lawyer? She grinned. Not when there are opportunities to be seized. I laughed, shaking my head. For the first time in years, it felt real. Like I wasn't just surviving, like I was actually moving forward. The next morning, I walked through my father's garden, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. The white roses were in full bloom. I knelt beside them, brushing my fingers over the petals. Looks like you were right, Dad, I whispered. The storm passed, and the garden's still here. I pulled out his letter one last time, reading the words that I knew by heart now. It's time to bloom, my girl. I smiled. And then I stood up, ready to bloom. This is the end of the story. Who do you think is the real final boss in this story?